3 in the morning. The storm had turned the valley black. She reached for the bed where the child slept. It was empty. 12 minutes later, a man that she had known for 3 weeks walked through the back door with her sister in his arms, soaking wet from the flooding creek, and said nothing at all. Just crouched down, checked the girl's face with both hands, and stood back up. That was the night she understood exactly who Cole Calloway was. But to understand why that moment mattered, we have to go back to the beginning. It starts with a letter folded twice in the breast pocket of a man standing alone in a dark barn, the night before a woman he had never met was about to arrive at his ranch. He had intended to burn it. He had not burned it. The letter was folded twice. Cole Calloway had folded it himself, standing alone in the dark barn, with the oil lamp throwing its amber light across the feed bins, in the hay bales, and the long row of horse stalls. He had been standing there for some time. The smell of the place surrounded him the way it had surrounded him since he was a boy, following his father Elias through these same doors. That particular combination of dry hay and saddle leather and pine sap and horse sweat and honest work, a smell that meant home to him in a way that no word or piece of music or view of the mountains ever quite managed. He had read the letter 3 times. He had intended to burn it. He had not burned it. He had folded it carefully instead and placed it in the breast pocket of his flannel shirt pressed flat against his chest, where it now sat with the quiet weight of an unfinished decision. The letter was short. That was the thing about it that had stopped him cold. He had read enough flowery correspondence in his life to recognize it on sight, the kind of language women sometimes used when they were trying to present a version of themselves more appealing than the truth. The kind of promises that arrived dressed in borrowed elegance and dissolved on contact with real life. He had no patience for any of that, but this letter had none of it. The handwriting was careful and even slanting, slightly to the right, and the words were plain in a way that had made him read them a second time before he could fully process what he was looking at. I understand this is not an ideal beginning for either of us. I am not a woman who makes promises she cannot keep, and I do not ask for things a person cannot give. I have no need for beautiful words. I have need for a real home. That is the entirety of what I am looking for. I hope that is enough for you to consider. Eleanor Hartwell. That was all. No flattery, no careful arrangement of virtues, no attempt to seem like something other than what she was. Just the plain statement of what she needed offered without apology, and without the particular brand of performance that so much of human communication required. Cole Calloway was 32 years old. He had been building this ranch for a decade, beginning the year his father fell from a horse and did not get up again, continuing through the years of debt and lean winters and the slow, difficult work of turning a struggling homestead into something that could sustain 3 brothers and perhaps their families someday. He had not made many decisions in those 10 years that he was ashamed of. He had kept his word to every man he had given it to. He had run his cattle honestly and paid his bills on time and treated the land with the respect you give a thing that will outlast you. 3 years ago, the only woman he had ever intended to marry had folded her own letter, left it on his front porch in a cream-colored envelope, and ridden away toward a bigger life with a wealthier man from Denver. He had read that letter standing in almost the same spot where he stood now, and the lesson he had taken from it was specific and permanent. He had been wrong about a person he was certain he understood. He had trusted his own judgment about a human being, and his judgment had been entirely mistaken. He would not make that error again. And now Reed had done this. He had to be honest with himself about that. Reed had told him months ago about the idea of placing an advertisement. Cole had said something imprecise in reply, something along the lines of it being worth considering, a phrase he had not intended as permission and had not been paying full attention to when he said it. He had not known Reed would take it as authorization. He had not known there would be letters, 8 actual letters back and forth over 4 months, a real woman with a real name and a careful handwriting, climbing onto a stagecoach somewhere east of the Mississippi and heading west toward Montana territory on the strength of a correspondence he had never fully read. He breathed in the cold night air. August in Montana, even in summer, pulled the warmth back out of the earth after sundown. The cold came down from the mountains the way water runs downhill, steady and without argument. The stagecoach from Billings would arrive in Ridge Creek tomorrow afternoon. Cade had already volunteered to go meet it with the enthusiasm of a 25-year-old who finds this kind of situation more interesting than troubling. Cole had 4 hours of darkness left to work out what on earth he was going to say to a woman who had come 1,500 miles on the strength of letters she believed he had written. He stepped out of the barn and looked up. The sky above Triple C Ranch was dense with stars, the kind of sky that exists only when you live 8 miles from the nearest town, and the darkness is complete and thorough. He put one hand on the top rail of the fence. The wood was rough and cool under his palm, worn by years and weather into something that felt like the truth of hard work made solid. He stood there for a long time. He did not sleep that night. Nobody knew that. Cole Calloway was not going to tell anyone. Eleanor Hartwell had not slept properly in 36 hours. The stagecoach from Chicago had been running since Tuesday morning, and it was now Thursday in the early afternoon, and the mountains outside the window had been growing steadily larger for the past several hours, in a way that should have been reassuring and was instead simply enormous. She was 22 years old and had grown up in Boston, Massachusetts, in a city of brick and cobblestone, and the particular noise of a place that has been settled long enough to feel permanent. Nothing in that life had prepared her for this. Nothing had prepared her for the scale of the western sky, which did not end, or for the color of the land, which was a yellow gold she had no prior reference for, or for the mountains themselves, which were not scenic in any of the ways that word implied, but were instead simply present and massive, and entirely indifferent to her opinion of them. She had the bundle in her lap. She had kept it there since Chicago. It was a generous length of sturdy cotton canvas, wrapped in a way that could accommodate a sleeping child of 6 years, which was what it currently contained. Lily had learned that this was a game, a traveling game with specific rules, and she was a child who took games seriously. The rules were simple: stay quiet and stay still until sister says it is safe to come out. She had been extraordinarily good at this game, which was a testament to her character, and also to the fact that she had spent most of the journey asleep, which children have a talent for, that adults entirely lose sometime after the age of 10. Ellie pressed her hand gently against the bundle and felt the small warmth of her sister breathing inside it. She had not told anyone about Lily. That was the fact she carried with her, heavier than the single leather bag wedged under the seat, heavier than the stack of folded letters tied with blue ribbon at the bottom of her traveling bag. In 8 letters exchanged over 4 months with the man who had signed himself C. Calloway, she had been honest about every meaningful particular of her situation. She had described the circumstances of her father's death plainly. She had explained the nature of the debts he had left behind. She had written clearly about who she was, what she could contribute, and what she was and was not able to promise. She had not written one word about Lily. The reasons for this submission had seemed entirely sensible in Boston. A man placing an advertisement for a wife in a Western territory had certain expectations, and those expectations did not commonly include a second passenger. A young woman arriving alone was already asking enough of a stranger's patience. A young woman arriving with a 6-year-old child who was not her daughter, but might as well have been, who had been in her sole care since the age of 4, who had a particular gift for walking directly up to unfamiliar adults and asking them questions of an extremely personal nature, without any apparent awareness that this was socially complex. That young woman was asking for something considerably more generous than any advertisement had described. She had waited and made a decision. She had then spent every subsequent night lying awake wondering if she had made the wrong one. The creditors had taken the house in October of 1871, 18 months after her father, George Hartwell, had died of lung fever on a Wednesday morning in April, still apologizing for the inconvenience of it all. George Hartwell had been a man of considerable warmth and almost no financial judgment, which was a combination that could sustain a family through a great deal of difficulty, but cannot sustain it through everything. He had left behind an accounting practice that had run at a loss for 3 years, a rented house that could not be kept without his income, and two daughters, one of whom was 20 years old and knew how to manage accounts and teach school and do plain sewing, and one of whom was 4 years old and knew how to ask questions and love her sister completely and could not yet tie her own shoes. Ellie had worked for 18 months. She had taken every position available to her. She had been methodical and careful, and she had saved everything she could, and it had not been enough. It was never going to be enough. The debt her father had left was not the kind of debt that yields to patience and diligence. It was the kind that grows while you are fighting it. On an evening in February, sitting at the small table in the small rented room she had moved them into after the house was gone with Lily asleep beside her and the oil lamp burning low and the Chicago Tribune spread open in front of her, because she could not afford to stop looking for any possibilities she might have missed, she had read the advertisement. Rancher, Montana Territory. Seeking capable woman for partnership and home. Hard life fair man, sincere inquiries only. She had sat with it for 3 days. Then she had written a letter. The reply had come from a man named Reed, though he had signed it with the initial C. The letter had been warm without being excessive, practical without being cold, and it had contained this sentence: "You would have a real home here built by men who keep their word." She had written back. He had written again. This had continued for 4 months, and in those 4 months, she had formed a picture of a man and a place, and the picture was not a romantic one, but it was a real one, and a real thing, she had learned by that point, was worth more than any beautiful fiction. She had purchased 2 stagecoach tickets. She had told the ticket agent the second was for her younger sister. She had left Boston on a Tuesday morning with 1 leather bag and 2 pieces of hope, which were Lily and the letters, and she had not looked back because she had nothing to look back at. The stagecoach slowed. Through the window, a narrow main street appeared lined with low wooden buildings, and a water trough, and a church with a white steeple, and a general store with a porch wide enough to hold a conversation on. A painted sign above one building read "The Ridge Line." The air coming through the window crack smelled of pine and red dust and livestock. Ridge Creek, Montana Territory. Ellie straightened her back and smoothed the front of her traveling dress. She checked that the bundle was settled securely. She put her chin at the angle her mother had shown her, the angle that meant, "I am here and I am not afraid," even when the second part required a certain amount of faith. The door swung open and she stepped down into the August light. Standing beside an old ranch wagon with a grin wide enough to constitute its own kind of weather was a young man with auburn hair and eyes that were some particular shade between amber and green, the kind of eyes that seemed to find most things in life genuinely entertaining. He was tall and broad, and he had pulled off his hat the moment he saw her holding it against his chest with both hands. "Miss Hartwell." He said it like a fact he was pleased about. "I am Cade Calloway. I am here to take you out to the ranch." She took him in quickly. He was not the one who had written those letters. She could tell that from the way he held his hat, in the openness in his face, the ease of a young man who has never in his life found a single moment too heavy to carry. The letters had been written by someone who chose words with care and weighed them before committing them to paper. This was not that person. She liked him immediately. That surprised her. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway," she said. "I have a bag in the back of the coach." The road from Ridge Creek to Triple C Ranch was 2 miles of red dirt cutting west through yellow grass. The mountains ahead grew larger with every turn of the wagon wheels, which should have been impossible, given that they were already large enough to seem unlikely. Cade drove with one hand loose on the reins and talked the way nervous young men talk when they are trying to make something easier and are not entirely sure how, which is to say he talked about things that did not carry much weight. The weather, the condition of the road after last week's rain, the fact that Cole said the grass turning early meant a hard winter. Then Cade said with the careful tone of someone delivering a prepared statement, "My brother Cole is not a man who uses many words. I want you to know that up front so it does not catch you sideways." Ellie turned to look at him. "You are telling me this for a reason," she said. "I am telling you so the first impression does not sink the whole enterprise. He is a good man. The best one I know, if I am being truthful. He just says what he means and stops there. Some people find it hard to read. I appreciate the warning, Ellie said. Cade nodded and returned his attention to the horses. She now had a clearer picture of why Reed and not Cole had been writing those letters. She filed this information carefully for later and looked out at the land as it opened before them. And then she saw the ranch. It came over a low rise, all of it at once, the house and the barn, and the white fences and the long stretch of summer pasture catching the afternoon light. The house was 2 stories built of good timber, with a roof pitched steep for snow, and a porch that ran across the full front width. The barn was larger than she had expected, painted a deep red that had weathered over years to something warmer and more honest. Beyond the pasture, beyond the fence lines and the grazing cattle, the Rocky Mountains stood against the sky with the absolute permanence of things that were old before the country was a country and would be standing long after everyone in this valley was gone. It was not what she had imagined. It was larger in some ways and smaller in others, and it was entirely and thoroughly real in a way that her months of corresponding and imagining had not quite prepared her for. And on the front porch of the house, standing completely still, was a man. Even from several hundred yards out, even seen across the distance of a wagon road and a fence line and a long stretch of summer pasture, there was something about how he stood that set him apart from any man she had previously encountered. He was very tall, broader across the shoulders than the width of the porch suggested was comfortable, and he was not doing anything at all except standing and watching the wagon come up the road. No wave, no movement toward them, no adjustment of posture or expression, just watching with the absolute stillness of someone who has never seen any reason to rush toward anything. Cade pulled the wagon to a stop near the gate and jumped down. From the direction of the barn came Reed Calloway, moving quickly, a man with chestnut hair and the open face of someone who has spent his life being trusted and knows it. He helped Ellie down from the wagon with genuine warmth, introduced himself, and his eyes carried the mixture of welcome and apology that she was already beginning to recognize as his particular expression. He turned toward the porch. "Cole," he called, "this is Miss Eleanor Hartwell." The man on the porch came down. He came down in no hurry at all. Each step settled and deliberate, the walk of a man who decided long ago that the world would wait for him and has since stopped rushing to meet it. He was taller than the distance had suggested, well over 6 feet, with hair that had gone to dark gold and had silvered early at the temples in the way of men who carry weight for years. His eyes were amber, the color of whiskey, held up to firelight, and they moved over Ellie once in a manner that was not impolite, but was entirely thorough. He took in the creased navy dress and the carefully maintained posture and the bundle of fabric held against her chest that she had not put down since she stepped off the stagecoach, and she felt herself being read the way a man reads a fence line for damage, methodically, without sentiment, looking for the thing that matters. He picked up the top letter and turned it over. He read the signature on the back of the envelope. "C. Calloway," he set it down. "I never wrote that," he said. "It was not an accusation. It was a simple statement of fact delivered in the flat voice he used for everything. But it landed in the kitchen with the weight of something that had been true for some time and was now finally in the open." Then he looked at her face. Then he looked at Reed. "Inside," he said, just the one word, low and flat as a plank of good timber. Reed said something in assent and followed him through the front door. Cade looked at Ellie with the expression of a man who would very much like to be somewhere else and cannot currently see his way to it. "He is not as bad as he looks," Cade offered. "He looks direct," Ellie said. "That is one way to put it." Through the closed door, she could hear the cadence of voices without the words. Reed's was measured and careful. Cole's was lower and landed with the particular weight of each word being placed precisely like stones set into a wall. Then clearly through the timber door, in the distance of the August afternoon, she heard it. She goes back on the next stage. Ellie received it with the stillness of someone who has spent 2 years learning how to absorb difficult information without responding to it in front of other people. Her posture did not change. Her face did not change. The bundle in her arms did not move. Cade had heard it too. He rubbed the back of his neck beneath his hat brim. Like I said, he started. It is all right, Ellie said. She meant it, or she meant to mean it. She had known this was a possible outcome when she boarded that stagecoach in Chicago. She had not traveled 1,500 miles to be undone by the sound of what she had already prepared herself to hear. She waited. Inside, Reed said something at length. A long silence followed. Then Cole said something shorter. Then the door opened. The table that evening held a specific silence of people who have things to say to one another and have not yet found the door into saying them. Lily was upstairs. Ellie had carried her up before the meal and settled her in the small room with the window that faced the mountains, and Lily had woken just enough to look around with wide blue eyes and ask whether this was their house now. And Ellie had said not exactly yet, and Lily had accepted that with the equanimity of a 6-year-old who understands that adults sometimes need more time than makes immediate sense, and she had gone back to sleep. So it was 3 men and 1 woman around a rough timber table, and Reed had set 4 places because Reed had set 4 places, and there was salt pork and beans and bread, because that was what Reed had made, and nobody said anything about the quality of it. Cole sat at the head of the table and ate in a silence that had no hostility in it and no warmth in it either. It simply was the way a mountain simply is taking up the space it occupies without making any particular argument for itself. He ate efficiently with the economy of a man who treats food as fuel and has learned through long experience to be grateful for it. From time to time, he looked at Ellie, and she looked back at him, and she recognized in those amber eyes the same thing she was doing herself, reading, filing, deciding. Cade tried to start a conversation 3 times. The first attempt concerned a fence line on the south pasture. The second was about the condition of the summer cattle. The third was a direct question to Ellie about the length of the journey from Chicago, which she answered with the date and the number of days, and asked him something in return about the nearest town. And for a few minutes they managed something that resembled ordinary conversation, while Reed watched them both with the expression of a man holding his breath. Cole ate his bread without comment. When the plates were cleared, Cole set down his cup and looked at Ellie with those flat, considering eyes and said, 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. Here, we are going to have a conversation, not a question, not an invitation, a statement of fact delivered in the same register as every other statement he had made since arriving at the table. Ellie looked back at him. I will be here, she said. He stood, took his hat from the peg by the back door, and went out toward the barn. The sound of the screen door settling back into its frame was the last thing he contributed to the evening. Cade watched him go. He does that, he said quietly. Goes to the barn at night. That is where he thinks. I gathered, Ellie said. Reed cleared the remaining dishes and said after a moment, I want you to know that I am sorry for the reception. That was not what I meant for you. It was honest, Ellie said. I have had enough pleasant things that were not true. Honest, I can work with. Reed looked at her for a beat with the expression of a man revising an earlier estimate. Then he nodded slowly in the way you nod when something has confirmed the thing you were hoping was true. Ellie helped him finish the clearing, and then she went upstairs to the small room with the mountain window. Lily was breathing steadily, deeply curled on her side with her fist tucked under her chin. Through the window, the mountains were black shapes against a sky gone violet, the first stars appearing above the eastern ridge. Ellie sat in the chair beside the bed for a long time. She thought about this letter in someone's breast pocket across the yard in the barn. She thought about the 8 letters tied with a blue ribbon in her own bag, and about the careful sentences in them, and about the man who had not written them, and what that meant about the ground she had thought she was standing on. She thought about the 10 years of work visible in every timber and fence post of this place. The kind of work that takes something out of a person and leaves something in its place, something harder and quieter and more reliable than what was there before. She thought about those 3 words. I never wrote that, and about the particular quality of them, which was not anger and was not accusation, but was something more precise and in some ways more useful, the statement of a man who would not pretend a thing was different from what it was. Outside across the yard, the oil lamp in the barn made a small orange square in the dark. She went to sleep. 7 in the morning. The kitchen smelled of strong coffee. Reed had been up before anyone else, and the coffee was the kind of strong that means a man has been thinking since well before dawn and needed something to do with his hands while he thought. There were cups and there was bread on the table. Cade was absent, which was almost certainly not an accident. Ellie came down in her second dress, the gray one she wore for work, her hair put up simply. She carried the bundle. Cole was already at the table. He was sitting at the head of it with his hands resting flat on the wood on either side of his cup, and he looked like a man who had arrived at a decision sometime in the night and was now waiting for the conversation that would put it into motion. He looked at her when she came in, and he looked at the bundle, and he looked back at her face, and none of these looks lasted longer than a second each. Ellie sat down across from Reed. She reached into the pocket of her dress and placed 8 letters on the table between them, tied with a narrow blue ribbon that had gone soft from handling. "I think we should begin with these," she said. Cole looked at them. He did not touch them immediately. Then he picked up the top letter and turned it over. He read the signature. He set it down. "I never wrote that," he said. The same flat voice as the night before. The same simple precision. She had heard it once already, and it did not land any differently the second time. "No," Ellie said. "I know. That is why I am asking who did." Reed put his coffee cup down with care. "I did," he said. "I placed the advertisement. I conducted the correspondence. I signed it with Cole's initial because I had told Cole we should consider this possibility, and he said he supposed it was worth thinking about, and I interpreted that as more of an agreement than he intended." A pause that had weight in it, Cole Ellie said. "You did not know the full extent of what Reed had arranged." "No," Cole said. "He said it the way he said, everything without decoration. I understood he was looking into a possibility. I did not understand he had made it a reality." Ellie took one letter from the bundle and unfolded it. She found the sentence she wanted without having to look for it long. She read it aloud without any particular tone. "You would have a real home here built by men who keep their word." She looked up at Cole. "Is that true?" Something moved behind those amber eyes. He held her gaze for the full count of 3 before he answered. "That part is true," he said. Ellie folded the letter and returned it to the bundle. She had rehearsed this conversation in her head across 3 states, and she had imagined a number of different versions of it, but she had not imagined the man being quite this straightforward about everything, and it changed the shape of what she needed to say next. "There is something I need to tell you," she said. "Something I left out of these letters that should have been in them. I made a deliberate decision to leave it out, and I have reconsidered that decision every single day of this journey." Cole did not move. Reed sat very still. Ellie opened her mouth to continue. She did not get the chance. From above came the soft sound of a door, and then the light, uneven footsteps of a child who has not yet learned that there are situations that call for quiet, and then Lily Hartwell appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was 6 years old. Her blonde hair was standing up on one side from sleep, and her blue eyes were large and alert, with the particular alertness of a child who has just woken up and decided that whatever's happening next is probably going to be interesting. She was wearing the small cotton dress Ellie had put her in the night before, slightly creased, and she had one hand on the door frame, and she looked at the 3 adults at the table with the calm and complete curiosity of someone who has not yet been taught that some rooms are dangerous to walk into. Sister Lily said clearly, "I am hungry." Cole went still. Reed's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth and did not complete the journey. The kitchen was quiet in the particular way of a room in which a significant piece of information has just arrived, and nobody has yet decided what to do with it. Ellie did not look away from Cole. She had made a decision in the half-second available to her that the only way through this was directly through it. She put both hands flat on the table and held his gaze without flinching. "This is Lily," she said. "She is my father's daughter from his second marriage. Her mother died the week she was born. When our father passed 2 years ago, there was no one else. She is my family, and she came with me." She paused. "I should have told you in the letters. That is a genuine apology, not a courtesy one. I was afraid that you would refuse to see me if I told you, and I made the wrong decision in leaving it out, and I am sorry for that. Cole looked at the girl. Lily looked back at Cole. There was a beat of silence in which the entire trajectory of what came next balanced on its edge. Lily, who had been observing this exchange with the attentive patience of someone watching a game she did not fully understand but found compelling, walked forward into the kitchen. She pulled out the empty chair beside Ellie and climbed up onto it. She looked at Cole with the direct, focused attention that only very young children and very old men can manage without it being considered impolite. "Do you have a cat?" she asked. From the direction of the back door came a sound that was a laugh compressed into something that might be mistaken for a cough if you were not listening carefully. This was Cade, who had apparently not moved as far from the vicinity as he had implied. Reed developed a sudden interest in the grain of the table. Cole looked at the girl for a long moment with those amber eyes that gave nothing away, and she looked back at him with the composure of someone who has not yet learned to find grown men unsettling regardless of their size or silence. "No," Cole said finally. "There is a gray cat outside," Lily said. "I saw it from the window this morning." "A paw, suetahiam. That is a stray," Cole said. "Can it be our cat?" The silence that followed this question was longer than the previous one. Ellie watched Cole's face, and she saw something move through it that was neither warmth nor coldness, but was something more complex than either the expression of a man encountering something that does not fit the categories he has carefully built for the world, and finding that the categories may require revision. "Do what you want with it," he said. Lily nodded with the complete satisfaction of someone who has concluded the important portion of a negotiation and is ready to move on to the matter of breakfast. What followed was by any honest measure the longest morning any of them could remember in recent years. Reed found things to do that kept him occupied near the stove. Cade materialized to help Lily with her breakfast and then disappeared again, with the efficiency of a man who knows when to be elsewhere. Cole sat at the end of the table and drank his coffee and did not speak for a considerable stretch of time, and Ellie sat and did not fill the silence with anything because she had learned that some silences need to be left alone. She had learned patience the hard way. 2 years of managing creditors and accounting ledgers and the particular exhaustion of being entirely responsible for another life with no one to share the weight of it had taught her things that could not be learned any other way. She had learned that silence was not always hostile. She had learned that men who said little often meant more by it than men who said a great deal. She had learned that the worst thing you could do in a situation made of tension was fill it with noise you would regret later. She waited. Eventually, Cole set down his cup and looked at her. "You could have told me," he said. "Yes," she said. "I could have." "Why didn't you?" Not a question exactly. More like an opening a door left ajar, an invitation to give him something true to work with. Ellie considered her answer before she gave it, which was something she had learned to do. "Because I did not know if you were the kind of man who would make a fair decision about a child before meeting her. I am telling you now for whatever that is worth." Cole was quiet for a moment, turning the cup in his hands. "What happened to your father?" he said. "Lung fever, 2 years ago this past spring. He was not a practical man. He was not a wealthy one. He left behind more warmth than most men do and considerably less in the way of stability. The debts. The creditors took the house in October. I had been working since before he died, and it was not going to be enough. It was never going to be enough, and the girl would have gone to an institution." Ellie said it plainly without looking for anything in his face because she was not asking for his sympathy. "That was not acceptable to me." Cole put his cup down. He looked at the table surface for a moment in a way that she was beginning to understand was his version of thinking a brief internal consultation before he said something he intended to mean. Then he stood and walked to the window. Outside, Lily had finished her breakfast and was now in the yard, standing approximately 4 feet from the gray cat on the fence post, perfectly still, with a focused expression of someone conducting a very careful operation. Cole watched her for a moment. "The child has never been near livestock," he said. "She has lived in Boston her entire life," Ellie said. She walked right up to Ranger at the water trough yesterday while Cade was leading him. A horse twice her height. I saw that. I apologize. She did not seem afraid. She is not afraid of much, Ellie said. It concerns me sometimes. Something in Cole's expression shifted. Not a softening, not precisely that, but a slight change in the quality of the stillness he carried the way a body of water shifts when something moves beneath the surface without breaking it. He turned from the window. Here is what I could offer, he said, and his voice was the same as it had been for everything else he had said since she arrived flat and even and stripped of all ornament. I can offer honesty. I can offer a roof and food and fair treatment. I cannot offer fine things or beautiful promises. I have no practice at those, and I would not trust my own fluency in them even if I did. He paused. She waited. I made a mistake once in trusting what I believed I understood about a person. The lesson I took from that is to be slower to make commitments and more certain of them when I make them. I am telling you this because you are owed a clear picture of who is standing in front of you. Ellie held his gaze across the width of the table. I appreciate that considerably more than you might expect, she said. There is the matter of the child. Yes, she was not part of the arrangement as I understood it. No, she was not. But she is your family. She is the only family I have. Cole turned briefly toward the window. Lily had taken 2 more careful steps toward the cat. The cat had not moved. Then she stays, he said. Obviously. The word obviously did something in Ellie's chest that she did not have an immediate name for. Not sentiment, not exactly that. It was more like the sensation of something that has been held under great tension for a very long time and has just in one quiet moment been allowed to release. Thank you, she said. Do not thank me yet. Nothing has been decided. He turned back and looked at her with the directness that she was beginning to understand was simply how he moved through the world without filter or pretense. I am asking for 1 month. You stay here, you see this ranch and this life for what it actually is. I will do the same on my end. At the end of that month, we talk again honestly and without obligation on either side. Ellie thought about it. 1 month was a real thing. It was enough time to see something clearly and not enough time to be fooled by patience. That is a fair arrangement, she said. It is the only kind of arrangement I know how to make. He reached for his hat from the peg beside the door and put it on with the settled finality of a man ending one part of a day and beginning the next. Cade will show you where things are. Reed will tell you what you need to know about the house. There has been no cook here for some time. I will be back for the evening meal. He went out. Through the window, Ellie watched him cross the yard. She watched him stop near the fence post where the gray cat was sitting, and she watched him say something in that low, flat voice of his to Lily. She watched Lily nod with great seriousness and take one additional careful step toward the animal. The cat stayed where it was. Cole went on toward the barn. Reed appeared at Ellie's elbow and set a fresh cup of coffee on the table in front of her. Well, he said quietly. Ellie picked up the cup. Well, indeed, she said. That night was different from the one before it. She could not have explained precisely how. The house was the same house. The mountains through the bedroom window were the same mountains. The sound of the wind against the porch boards was identical. But something in the quality of the silence had changed the way a room changes after a long conversation in which something true has been said that could not be taken back. Not more comfortable necessarily, but more honest. More like a place where real things could happen to real people. She had bathed Lily and put her to bed in the small room with the mountain view, and Lily had talked for a while about the cat, which she had formally named Chester, and about the horse that Cade had let her observe from the fence, and about whether Mr. Cole was nice or not nice, a question she was still in the process of categorizing. Ellie had told her that Cole was honest, which was different from nice, but was in many ways a more durable quality, and Lily had considered this and found it reasonable and fallen asleep midway through her next sentence, the way children do when the day has finally spent every last resource they had. Ellie sat in the chair by the window and looked at the mountains for a long time. She thought about the letter in someone's breast pocket, across the yard in the barn. She thought about the 8 letters tied with a blue ribbon in her own bag, and about the careful sentences in them, and about the man who had not written them, and what that meant about the ground she had thought she was standing on. She thought about the 10 years of work visible in every timber and fence post of this place. The kind of work that takes something out of a person and leaves something in its place, something harder and quieter and more reliable than what was there before. She thought about Lily asking a man she had known for 3 minutes whether he had a cat. She thought about the particular expression on his face when he had said, "Do what you want with it," which was about a stray animal, but was also, she understood, about something considerably larger. She allowed herself to feel carefully with the appropriate caution as someone who has learned not to invest in uncertain things the first small warmth of something that might become hope. Not certainty, not anything close to certainty, but possibility. Impossibility, she had found, was what you started with. Everything worth having had started with nothing more solid than that. She went to bed. Sometime later, in the deep quiet of the Montana night, she heard footsteps in the hall. They were slow and deliberate, the particular weight and rhythm she had already, after only 2 days, come to recognize. They came from the direction of the stairs and moved down the hall and stopped outside or near the doorway of the small room where Lily was sleeping. She could not be entirely certain which door, and it did not matter. She lay still and listened. Through the wall, in the darkness, in the distance of the hallway, barely there but present, she could hear a sound. It was Lily talking in her sleep the way she did sometimes when the day had been full of new things, small fragments of words that dissolved into murmurs, completely peaceful, entirely unaware that anyone was listening. The footsteps outside did not move for a long time. Then quietly they moved away. Cole Calloway went wherever he went in the small hours of a Montana night, back to his room, or down to the kitchen, or out to the porch to look at the stars the way a man stands when he is working on something he does not have language for yet. It did not matter which direction. What mattered was that he had stopped. He had stopped outside that door and stood in the dark and listened to the sound of a child sleeping peacefully in a strange place, and something about that had made him stay there for a while before he moved on. Ellie lay in the dark and breathed out slowly the particular slow release of breath that belongs to someone who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has found in an unexpected moment a small and specific reason to set a portion of it down. Tomorrow was going to be another day of uncertain things. There were 100 ways this could still go wrong. She was a long way from Boston and a long way from anything she had ever known, in a house full of people she was still learning to read, in a land whose rules she had not yet figured out. But tonight, for the first time since she had boarded that stagecoach in Chicago with a bundle of secrets and a plan held together more by determination than by any reasonable expectation of success, something felt possible in a way that went beyond strategy or calculation. She slept. In the barn across the dark yard, an oil lamp burned low. A man who had not slept properly in 2 nights sat with his elbows on a workbench and a letter in his breast pocket, and a mind doing what minds do when they encounter something they did not prepare for. He had decided in his barn, in his darkness, that the woman who had written those words had told him the truth about herself. She had told him the truth of this morning about the child and about the decision she had made and about the fact that she was sorry for it. She had told him the truth about her father and about the debts and about the particular kind of courage that does not announce itself or ask to be recognized. And she had said, in response to the plainest version of himself he knew how to offer, that honest was something she could work with. Cole Calloway was not a man who arrived at conclusions quickly or announced them loudly when he got there. But he was a man who arrived at them. He folded the letter and placed it back in his pocket. He put out the lamp. Outside, the Montana sky was full of stars and the mountains stood black against it, and the ranch sat quiet at the end of its dirt road with its lights all out and its people all asleep, all except one who walked slowly from the barn to the house and stood for a moment on the back porch in the cold August dark before going inside. He stood with one hand on the porch post, and he looked out at the land his father had built, and that he had rebuilt, and that he had worked every day for 10 years to keep, And he thought about a woman who had traveled 1,500 miles with a sleeping child in her arms, and a spine that did not bend, and a voice that did not apologize for more than it actually owed. He thought I was right about her. That was the last thought he allowed himself before he went inside and closed the door against the night. Tomorrow was going to be a different kind of day. The first full day began before the sun had cleared the eastern ridge. Ellie was down in the kitchen before anyone else, which was a decision she had made the night before and carried out with the quiet resolve of someone who understands that the way you begin a thing tends to shape what it becomes. She had the stove going and the coffee ready by the time she heard Cole's boots on the stairs, and when he came through the kitchen door and found both things already done, he stopped for half a second. He looked at the stove. He looked at her. He said nothing at all. He picked up the cup she had set out and drank. He went out to the barn. That was the beginning of something, though neither of them would have named it that at the time. Over the days that followed, a rhythm established itself the way rhythms do on working land, not by discussion or agreement, but by the simple accumulation of repeated things. Ellie cooked breakfast before the men came in from the first hour of morning work. She cleaned and organized the kitchen, which had the disorder of a place managed by people whose attention was always needed somewhere else. She kept Lily close enough to supervise and free enough to explore, which was a balance requiring constant adjustment and was never entirely right, but was always approximately workable. Lily explored with the thoroughness of a small naturalist cataloging new territory. She named things. The gray cat Chester had been the beginning. The horse that Cade led to water every morning became Duke, which was apparently the name Lily felt the animal had been waiting for all along, and Cade accepted this with the good humor of a man who had learned not to argue with 6-year-olds about nomenclature. The small black hen that laid her eggs in the wrong location became Blossom. The large orange barn cat that nobody had previously taken much notice of became General for reasons Lily declined to elaborate on. Cole watched all of this from a careful distance. He did not interfere, and he did not comment. But Ellie, who had become a close student of the things Cole did not say, noticed that he began to take slightly longer routes across the yard when Lily was out in it, routes that happened to pass near whatever the girl was occupied with. He never stopped for real conversation. He would sometimes answer a question if one was directed at him. He never initiated anything, but he took the longer routes. That was something. Ellie filed it away with the other somethings and let them accumulate. On the third day, Reed walked Ellie through the full extent of the ranch. It was not a social tour. It was the kind of introduction you give to a person you believe is going to be managing a portion of something and therefore needs to understand how all the portions connect. He showed her the root cellar and the smokehouse and the well and the locations of the tools that lived outside and needed to be returned to their specific places because in an emergency you could not spend time looking for them. He showed her the east pasture and the north pasture and explained the difference in their uses across seasons. He showed her the outbuildings and the equipment and the places where the fence was sound and the places where it always needed watching. And then he walked her to the creek. Clearwater Creek ran along the western edge of the Triple C property, entering at the northwest corner and cutting down through a stand of aspens before widening into a shallow rocky run that crossed open ground before exiting at the southwest. It was not large. In August, it ran perhaps 8 feet across at its widest point and no deeper than your knee, but it was cold and clean, and it did not stop. In a land where water meant cattle and cattle meant survival, this creek was the axis around which the entire worth of Triple C revolved. Reed stood at the bank with his hands in his pockets and told her about Harlan Voss, the way you tell someone about a weather pattern straightforwardly because the information is useful and the situation is real. Voss had been trying to acquire or claim the water rights to Clearwater Creek for 5 years. He had offered to buy. He had applied legal pressure through channels that were creative, if not always sound. He had conducted business in ways that made the other ranchers in the valley cautious about crossing him publicly. Cole had refused every approach every year without variation. "He will not sell," Reed said, looking at the water moving over the stones. "It is not about the value of it. Our father drew this boundary. Cole considers that a promise made that cannot be unmade. Ellie stood at the bank and watched the water work its way through the rocks. She was beginning to understand that she was dealing with a man who had organized his entire life around the principle of keeping the commitments he made, which was both admirable and she suspected occasionally a burden of considerable weight. Men like that carried things for a long time. They did not put things down easily. That is a rare quality, she said. Reed looked at her from the side with the expression he used when something matched what he had hoped. Yes, he said, it is. On the fifth day, she asked Cole to teach her to shoot. She had been thinking about it since the first morning, since the moment she had stood at the kitchen window and understood the scale of the land and the distance from any other person, in the simple arithmetic of a woman on a ranch in 1873 Montana Territory who could not defend herself or the child she was responsible for. It was not a dramatic conclusion. It was a practical one, the kind you arrive at when you have stopped letting fear make your decisions for you. She found him at the fence line on the south pasture, replacing a post that had rotted at the base, working with the steady economy of a man who has done this specific task enough times that his body does it, while his mind is elsewhere. I need to learn to shoot, she said. He looked up at her. He assessed the request the same way he assessed everything, without hurry and without visible reaction. I will teach you, he said. He said it the way he might have said, I will fix the water trough, or I will get the cattle in from the east pasture, as a simple declaration of a thing that needed doing and would be done. There was no particular tone on it, no suggestion of favor being extended. But she noticed that he did not suggest Cade for the job or Reed. He had said, I. They went out to the flat ground behind the barn the following morning when the light was low and even and the air still cold from the night. He brought the Winchester, a long rifle that fit his frame in the way tools fit the hands that have worked with them for years naturally and without adjustment. He set up a row of tin cans on the top rail of the fence at 40 yards and came back to where she was standing. He showed her how to hold it. The stock against the shoulder, seated into the meat of it, not against the bone where the recoil would hurt. The cheek down against the wood. The weight of the barrel supported rather than gripped. He talked through each piece of it in his flat, measured voice, and when he was satisfied with the explanation, he stood back. The first shot went wide by several feet. She absorbed the recoil with surprise and then adjusted her understanding of it. Again, Cole said. The second went wide by less. She adjusted. Again. By the fifth shot, she was close. By the 10th, she was consistent enough to matter. She did not celebrate this. She noted it and set up the next shot with the same concentration she had applied to the first. Cole watched from a few steps back with his arms crossed in the particular expression she was learning to recognize as his version of approval, which was the complete absence of criticism. You are a quick study, he said. I have always found that things go faster when you stop being upset about where you are starting from, she said. He looked at her for a moment with something in those amber eyes that was not quite a smile, but was close enough to one to matter. Good, he said, and he walked back to the fence to reset the cans she had knocked down. That afternoon, when Ellie returned upstairs to change out of the work clothes she had worn for the lesson, she found something on the windowsill of her bedroom that had not been there before. A small glass bottle no taller than her hand holding 3 stems of the yellow wildflowers that grew in the grass along the south fence line. The stems were cut cleanly. The flowers were fresh. Nobody claimed them. Nobody acknowledged them. Nobody, to the best of her knowledge, had been upstairs in the hours she had been at the fence. Ellie stood at the window and looked at those 3 small flowers in their bottle for a long time longer than the thing itself warranted, and something in her chest rearranged itself in the quiet way of furniture being moved in a room that is in the process of becoming a home. The evenings began to change sometime in the second week. Cole had always been punctual about the work itself out before light and through until the last task was done. But the evening meal had previously been something he took when he happened to arrive, often well after the others had eaten, finishing alone at the table by lamplight with whatever was left. Ellie had noticed this in the first days and had not commented on it. On the eighth evening, he came through the back door at 6 o'clock. The food was hot. The table was set. Reed looked at him over his coffee cup and said nothing. Cade looked at Reed and also said nothing. Lily, who had no investment in this particular piece of social theater, told Cole that she had decided the cow in the near pasture needed a name, and she was considering Abigail. Cole sat down and said he had no opinion on the matter. Lily said that meant yes. The meal was louder than any that had come before it. Cade told a story about the time he and Reed had tried to repair a piece of equipment 3 years ago and had made it significantly worse. A story that accumulated detail as it went, and Reed provided corrections that were technically corrections, but were functionally a way of participating without admitting he found it funny. Lily laughed at the parts intended for laughing, and at several additional parts she found privately amusing for reasons she did not share. Cole ate in his customary silence, but he ate at the same time as everyone else, and twice Ellie caught him watching Lily with the careful, focused attention of a man cataloging something he has not yet fully named. After the dishes were done and Lily had been settled upstairs, Ellie came back to the kitchen to find Cole still at the table with his coffee. This had not happened before. She sat down. They were quiet for a while, the kind of quiet that had shifted sometime in the past 2 weeks from the tension of strangers towards something that could be sustained without effort. He said, "Your sister talks to everything." "She does," Ellie said. "She has since she could form words. My father used to say she was giving the world its due attention." Cole turned his cup in his hands. "Your father sounds like he was a particular kind of man." "He was," Ellie said. "He was impossible in many ways and wonderful in others. I miss him more than makes practical sense." Cole did not say he was sorry. He did not offer any of the reflexive consolations that people use to move past a moment of genuine feeling. He simply sat with it the way you sit with weather, acknowledging it without trying to change it. That was the thing about him she was finding. He did not rush past anything. The shirt was the kind of event that would have appeared entirely unremarkable to someone observing from outside and meant something specific to the two people inside it. Cole had left it by the back door one morning, without explanation. A flannel work shirt with the shoulder seam coming apart in a thin place at the elbow that had been working toward a hole for some time. He had not asked. He had placed it on the hook below his hat and gone out. Ellie found it when she came down. She sat with it in the afternoon by the east window where the light was best, and she took her time. She repaired the shoulder seam with stitches closer than strictly necessary. She reinforced the thin place at the elbow with careful work that would hold for years. She found a second worn place he had not noticed yet near the left cuff, and she addressed that too because it would become the shoulder's problem by winter if left alone. When Cole came in that evening and found the shirt folded on the table, he picked it up and looked at the stitching with the same methodical attention he gave to fence posts and water flow and everything else. He turned it over. He examined the collar. "Thank you," he said. She was at the stove and did not turn around. "The shoulder was already going again," she said. "You should not be so hard on the left side." He was quiet. Then, "How long have you known that?" "Since the first time I watched you working," she said. "You favor your right hand and compensate too far with the left." "Nobody has told me that," he said. "Nobody was looking," she said. She heard him take the shirt and go. She heard him stop at the kitchen door and then move on. She kept her face entirely to herself and went on with the stove work because some things did not need to be acknowledged to be real. The trip to Ridge Creek on the second Saturday was Cade's suggestion, and Ellie agreed because Lily needed certain practical items, and because it was useful to know the shape of a community before circumstances required any particular kind of introduction. Ridge Creek, on a Saturday morning, had the focused energy of a frontier town conducting its weekly business. The main street held perhaps 40 people at any given time, moving between Fuller's General Store and the feed merchant and the church hall and the water trough, and the pace was measured in the way of communities where everyone expects to see everyone again before the week is out. Cade walked beside Ellie with the ease of someone entirely comfortable in his own territory. Lily held Ellie's hand and looked at everything with the open curiosity of a child who has not yet been taught to pretend not to notice. Agnes Fuller came out of the general store as they were going in. She was a woman of 55 with small, observant eyes and the bearing of someone who considers the careful management of community information to be a genuine civic service. She stopped when she saw Ellie took in the full picture with practiced efficiency and said, "You must be the Calloway girl." Ellie met her gaze. "Eleanor Hartwell," she said. "It is good to meet you, Mrs. Fuller." Agnes looked at Lily. "And this is—" "My sister," Ellie said. "Lily." Agnes looked at Lily for a moment with the evaluating attention of someone updating a mental file. Lily looked back with complete composure. "Cole Calloway taking on a woman and a child," Agnes said, in the particular tone of someone presenting a fact for general consideration rather than expressing a personal view. "Three brothers taking on a woman and a child," Cade said pleasantly from just inside the doorway. "The whole operation, all of us, committed to the enterprise." Agnes looked at him and then at Ellie. "I hope it works out for everyone," she said in the way that means, "I will be watching this carefully." She continued down the street. Inside the store, Ellie gathered what was needed with the focused practicality of someone who accounts for every penny spent. She talked with Cade about what was sensible to purchase in town and what was more economical to plan ahead for, and he provided the regional knowledge readily, and they were done in 20 minutes. On the way back to the wagon, a man Cade identified as Wendell Cooper, who made barrels and had opinions about most things, stopped them to share his assessment of the Calloway situation in the form of a casual observation. Cade received this with the cheerful indifference of a young man who has decided that people of that particular type are not worth genuine engagement, and they moved on. Lily, who had been listening to all of it, waited until they were past before saying clearly, "That man does not know you. Why does he think he can speak about you?" Cade crouched down to her level. "Because he does not have enough interesting things happening in his own life," he said, "so he borrows from other people's." Lily considered this. "That is sad," she said. "A little bit," yes, Cade agreed. Before they reached the wagon, a hand touched Ellie's arm, and she turned to find a man of 60 in a plain dark coat with a face weathered by decades of outdoor service and eyes that were genuinely kind rather than performing it. He introduced himself as Reverend Silas Bird and said without preamble, "I have known the Calloway brothers since their father was alive. I wanted to tell you personally that you have come to good people. I think you may already know that, but sometimes it helps to hear it from someone with nothing to gain by saying it." Ellie looked at him steadily. "Thank you," she said. "That helps more than you might expect." He nodded and returned to the church hall. Cade watched him go with visible affection. "He buried my father," Cade said quietly. "He has been in that church since before I was born. I expect he will marry all of us someday, and then outlive us too." Ellie looked down the main street of Ridge Creek at the people going about their Saturday at the mountains, visible above the roof lines at the end of the road, so close and so permanent. She thought, "This is a place I could learn. This is a place that could over time become known." She lifted Lily up onto the wagon seat, and they drove back to Triple C under the wide Montana sky. The rain came on a Tuesday night in the third week. Not the hard storm weather of mountain autumn, but the soft, persistent kind that moves through a valley like a long thought, filling everything without urgency, as though it has time and intends to use it. Ellie could not sleep. This was not unusual. She had spent 2 years in Boston not sleeping for reasons that were specific and pressing, and the habit had not entirely released her even in Ridge Creek, where the specific reasons had changed shape. She got up and put on her heavier robe and went downstairs and made tea and took it to the back porch, which had a deep enough overhang to stay mostly dry. Cole was already there. He was sitting on the top porch step with his elbows on his knees and a cup of something long cold in his hands, looking out at the rain moving through the dark. He did not look surprised to see her. He shifted slightly to make room without being asked. She sat down at what she had learned was the appropriate distance which was close enough to talk without raising your voice and far enough that neither person felt the other's presence as a pressure. They sat in the rain sound for a while. Then Cole said, "My father built this house in 3 years, starting from almost nothing. He had my mother hold the first post while he drove it. She said she did not believe he would finish it until the last piece of roof went on." He paused. The rain tapped steadily against the boards of the yard. "They lived here 20 years, he said. She went first. Lung fever, same as your father. He lasted 3 more years without her, and then he did not." Ellie held her teacup in both hands and let the warmth move through her fingers. "He gave you this place," she said. "He gave me the responsibility of it," Cole said. "That is not always the same thing." Ellie looked out at the rain. "When they took our house in Boston," she said, "I stood on the front step and watched the men carry out the last of the furniture, and I thought I was grieving the house. It took me a long time to understand I was grieving a particular version of my father that had existed in those rooms. The way he sat in his chair by the window, the sound of his pen on paper late at night. Those things did not move. Memories," Cole said. "Yes, the kind that live in places. You cannot take them with you." A long silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, not empty. The kind of silence that has been earned by two people who have been telling each other the truth for 3 weeks without quite saying everything, and who are only now beginning to understand that the things left unsaid have been forming their own kind of conversation. "This land," Cole said, "eventually I would not sell for any price Voss could name. Not because of what it is worth in dollars, because my father is in it, because what I made here is in it. Because a man has to have something he will not trade away, or it turns out there was nothing to him that mattered." Ellie turned and looked at him in the dark, at the lines of his face, the set of his jaw, the hands that were large and worn and had built more than most men touched in a lifetime. "I think," she said carefully, "that you may be one of the last of a particular kind." "What kind?" he said. "The kind that does not separate what he believes from what he does." She paused. "Most people manage one or the other. Both at once is rare." Cole looked out at the rain. He did not respond immediately, and she understood that he was treating it as the serious thing it was rather than rushing to say something that would reduce it. After a while, he said, "You see clearly." "I have had to," she said. They stayed until the rain eased. Then they went inside separately, and Ellie lay in the dark of her room and looked at the ceiling and felt with a clarity that surprised her that she was no longer exactly a guest in this house. She was not sure yet what she was, but it was something else, something that had not had a name 3 weeks ago and was beginning to need one. The following Thursday, Dorothea Mason rode into the yard at Triple C Ranch. Ellie was on the front porch with Lily, who was attempting to demonstrate to Chester the correct technique for sitting in a patch of afternoon sun, which Chester was tolerating, with the resignation of a cat who has made his peace with the terms of his existence. The afternoon was warm and clear and entirely ordinary, and then it was not. She came in through the main gate on a hired horse, riding with the practiced ease of a woman who knows she is being observed and has made arrangements accordingly. The dress was deep violet, not the kind of garment you put on for an 8-mile ride along a dirt road, unless the dirt road is not the point. The hat was correct. The posture was considered. She was by any objective measure a handsome woman, and she carried that fact with the competence of someone who has found it to be a reliable resource. She brought the horse to a stop and looked at Ellie with eyes that performed warmth very accurately. "You must be the new arrival," she said. "I am Dorothea Mason. Cole and I are old friends." Ellie stood. Old friends was a phrase with several rooms in it, and she understood immediately which rooms were being indicated. "Eleanor Hartwell," she said. "It is good to meet you." Chester had retreated under the porch railing. Lily moved to stand beside Ellie without being asked, which was Lily's particular way of expressing that she had read a situation and chosen her position. Cole came out from the barn at that moment, and Ellie watched his face from 20 feet away. What she saw there was not the expression of a man encountering a pleasant surprise. It was the expression of a man encountering a particular kind of pain, the kind that belongs to something he had believed was behind him and has just been informed by the arrival of evidence that it is not entirely. Dorothea, he said, his voice was exactly level. Cole, she said, and the way she said his name carried a specific intimate weight, the weight of someone who considers themselves to be reintroducing a prior claim. It has been too long. What brings you to Ridge Creek, he said. She explained about her mother. She explained about wanting to come home. She explained with the fluency of someone who has rehearsed these explanations enough times that they move without friction. Cole listened with the patience of a man who has learned to wait for the part that is actually true. He invited her inside for tea because this was the decent thing, and Cole did the decent thing. For the next hour, Ellie sat in her own kitchen and watched a skilled person work. Dorothea Mason was precise about it. She was warm to read and easy with Cade. She was impeccably courteous to Ellie in the way that a practiced person is courteous to someone they have already assessed and placed. She spoke to Cole with the casual intimacy of a shared history that she allowed to breathe in the room without stating it directly. She asked Ellie about Boston with what appeared to be genuine interest. She was in every observable way perfectly behaved. And yet, Ellie had spent 2 years paying close attention to the distance between what people said and what they meant, because the people she had been dealing with had all been perfectly courteous too, and had all wanted things that their courtesy did not advertise. She had learned to read that distance. The distance in Dorothea Mason's conversation was substantial and carefully maintained. After Dora left, Reed appeared beside Ellie in the kitchen as she washed the cups. She and Cole were engaged, he said quietly. 3 years ago, she left him. Ellie continued washing. I had understood something of that nature, she said. Her husband died, Reed said. He went broke first, and then he died. She has come back with very little and a substantial need, and she is not a woman who ignores a resource. Ellie turned and looked at him directly. You are telling me this because you think I need to know it, she said. I am telling you because you are smart enough to work it out on your own, and I would rather you had the full picture from the beginning, Reed said. And because Cole will not tell you, he does not speak about things like that. He will present the situation as settled when it is not entirely settled. Ellie dried her hands on the kitchen cloth and looked out the window toward the barn. Is it settled, she asked. Reed was quiet for a moment. I believe so, he said. I also know that a belief and a certainty are not the same thing, and that a man who has been carrying a wound for 3 years may not fully understand how much of it is still there until something puts pressure on it. Ellie nodded once and went back to work. That evening, Cade came in from the barn and mentioned without apparent emphasis that Cole had been out there since Dora left, and it was now nearly 7 o'clock. Reed heated the food and set the table. Ellie kept Lily occupied and said nothing. Cole came in at 7:30. He sat down and ate with the focused efficiency of a man who has been somewhere difficult in his own head and has returned to the practical world by a deliberate act of will. Nobody asked where he had been. Nobody commented on the hour. There were things you did not press on, and this was one of them. He caught Ellie's eye once across the table. She held his gaze for a moment without expression, and he looked away, and she did the same, and nothing was said, and everything was noted, and the meal continued. 2 days after Dorothea Mason's visit, Harlan Voss rode up to Triple C on a bay horse with the unhurried pace of a man to whom time does not feel like a constraint. He was lean and well-dressed for a working town with careful grooming that announced the kind of man who considers his appearance a professional instrument. His eyes were gray and level and contained the particular quality of someone who is continuously calculating, which made him effective at what he did and uncomfortable to be around when you had something he wanted. Cole met him in the yard. Reed stood 10 feet back. Ellie, who was at the side of the house with Lily, stayed where she was and watched. Voss said he was riding through, which was demonstrably false, given that Triple C sat at the end of its own road 8 miles from town, but he said it pleasantly. He said he had heard about the new arrangement at the ranch. He said he thought it was a fine thing, a man settling down a woman finding her footing in the territory. Then he said, of course these arrangements can become complicated, legally speaking, when the circumstances of the parties involved are less than entirely straightforward. Cole said nothing. Voss looked at Ellie for the first time. He looked at her the way a man looks at a piece of property whose ownership is in question, with an assessing patience that had nothing to do with her as a person and everything to do with what she might represent in a negotiation. I am simply pointing out, Voss continued, that a man facing a complicated situation might find it sensible to simplify where he can. The water rights conversation, for instance, could arrive at a very clean resolution if the surrounding circumstances were handled with practical wisdom. Cole turned and looked at Voss with the flat amber eyes that held no heat and required no volume, because sometimes the most precise statement a man can make is made without any words at all. Ride back to town, Cole said. Come back when you have something real to say. Voss smiled in the way of a man who anticipated this answer and has already factored it in. He tipped his hat toward Ellie, which was the most unsettling thing he did, and rode away at the same unhurried pace he had arrived at. Cole watched him until he was gone. He did not move. He did not change expression. Then he turned and looked at Ellie across the yard with a look that was direct and carried something new in it, something that had not been present in the first days of her being there. A recognition, an acknowledgement that the facts she had told him about her father's debts were now being deployed against both of them by a patient man, and that this complication had arrived from her direction. She met his gaze and held it. I am sorry that my presence has given him a tool, she said. Cole shook his head once, the small, definitive motion of a man closing a line of reasoning. You did not give him a tool, he said. He found a circumstance in the road, and he is calling it a weapon. That is his character, not yours. He went back to the barn. Reed came to stand beside her. Cole does not hold people accountable for the uses others make of them, he said. He never has. Ellie stood in the August yard and watched the place where Voss had gone over the rise. And she thought about the network of implications a patient man with access to records could construct around an ordinary set of circumstances. And she thought about what it meant that Cole had said, not yours, without hesitation or qualification. It meant something. She let it mean something. The end of the second week arrived the way endings often do on working land, not with announcement, but with a quality in the air that tells you something has shifted even before you can say what. Cole had been in the far pasture all afternoon with Cade and two seasonal hands, working through a section of fence that had been a problem since spring. Ellie had been inside working through a pile of accumulated mending, listening to Lily explain to Chester the various notable properties of different types of grass, which Chester appeared to find more absorbing than most topics. Late in the afternoon, when the light had gone golden and started its lean toward amber, Ellie walked to the east window to check for the returning horses on the track. She looked, and through the glass across the width of the yard, in the distance to the east fence, she saw Cole. He was standing at the near fence, not the far pasture fence, but the fence closest to the house, which meant he had been back for some time. He was standing with one arm resting on the top rail, and he was not looking at the fence or the pasture or the mountains. He was looking at the front porch. Ellie followed the line of his gaze. On the porch, in the position where she and Lily had sat the previous afternoon, the step was empty. But she understood in a moment what she was seeing. He must have come through the yard the day before and found them there, the two of them on the step in the late light, with the small book open between them, Lily's lips moving through the words. And he had seen it, and he had not said so. And now he was standing at the fence, looking at the empty step where they had been. The set of his shoulders was different from how they usually held themselves. They were not carrying anything. He was just standing. Ellie stepped back from the window so he would not see her watching. She stood in the kitchen in the fading light and held the mending in her hands and breathed carefully with the deliberate attention of someone who has just encountered a thing they did not expect and are giving it the respect of proper consideration. She thought, he does not know that I have been watching him the same way in the same quiet from a distance he is unaware of. She thought we are two people who are very practiced at not showing what we notice. She thought that is going to have to change eventually. Neither of them can live in that kind of careful silence forever. Something will break it. She did not know yet what that something would be or when it would arrive, but she thought it is coming. Reed came in through the back door, saw her standing still at the window, looked past her to the yard, looked back at her. He said nothing, which was one of the things she had come to appreciate most about him. He understood the value of not filling every silence. He put the kettle on instead. Outside, the August light pulled away from the mountains, and the yard went quiet, and the first evening star appeared above the western ridge, sharp and clear, the way stars are when the air is dry and the sky has no haze. On the far side of the fence, a man pushed himself upright from the rail and walked back toward the barn with his hat in his hand. That night, as Ellie sat with Lily until the girl was close to sleep, Lily said in the matter-of-fact way she said most things that actually mattered. "I like it here, Ellie." Ellie smoothed the blanket over her. "Do you?" "I like the horses. I like Chester. I like Reed because he listens. I like Cade because he's funny." She paused. "I like Mr. Cole too, but different." Different, how Ellie said. Lily thought about this with the seriousness she reserved for questions that deserved it. "He is like the mountain," she said. "He is not funny and he does not talk much, but you know he is there and it makes everything feel more solid." Ellie sat with that for a long moment. "That is exactly right," she said. Lily settled deeper into the pillow. "Is this our home now?" she said in the drowsy voice of someone asking, not because they need new information, but because they want to hear the answer said aloud. Ellie looked out the window at the dark where the mountains were. "I think it might be getting that way," she said. Lily was asleep before she finished the sentence. Ellie sat in the chair by the window for a long time in the dark that was not quite dark because of the stars and the quarter moon coming up over the eastern ridge. She thought about all the things that were still uncertain and all the things that had in the past 2 weeks without ceremony or announcement become certain in the way that only real things become certain. She had come here for a home. She had found something more complicated than that which was the beginning of one, which is different from the finished article, and in some ways more valuable because you can still see all the work that went into it. She went to sleep thinking about that. Tomorrow was another day of honest things. She had stopped being afraid of honest things. That she thought might be the most significant change of all. The legal notice arrived on a Friday morning. Reed brought it back from town in the inside pocket of his coat, which was where he had put it, so that Ellie would not see it before he had a chance to speak with Cole first. He did not manage the second part of this plan because Ellie was in the kitchen when he came through the door, and she read his face with the accuracy of someone who has learned to translate what men do not say. She held out her hand. Reed looked at Cole, who was at the table. Cole gave him a single slight nod. Reed put the paper down. It was a formal notice bearing the seal of the Ridge Creek Justice of the Peace and the signatures of Harlan Voss in the office of the district land recorder. It ran a one-page and contained in careful legal language 2 separate declarations. The first challenged the boundary and ownership of the water rights to Clearwater Creek, citing a clause in the original 1851 land grant that Voss claimed had been improperly recorded. The second noted, as a matter of relevant background, the financial and legal history of one Eleanor Hartwell, formerly of Boston, Massachusetts, including outstanding debts and pending obligations, and questioned the validity of any legal standing she might be assumed to hold in relation to Triple C Ranch or its attached properties. Her name appeared in the second paragraph. It had been underlined. Cole read it twice and set it flat on the table. His hands were entirely still. Reed sat down. Cade leaned against the kitchen wall with his arms crossed and the expression of a young man working hard to stay quieter than he wanted to be. Ellie picked up the paper. She read it from the first line to the last, including the footnotes, which was how you read something written by a man who knew how to bury the meaningful parts in the margins. She set it back down when she was done. "He is not really attacking the water rights," she said. "He is using me as a lever to destabilize the overall position." Cole looked at her. "The water rights claim is a pretext," she continued. He cannot win it on its own merits, or he would have tried by now through straightforward means. What he can do is complicate the surrounding situation enough to create pressure. I am the complication. My history is the material. He calculated that having an encumbrance attached to this property in the form of a woman with unresolved financial history might introduce enough uncertainty that you would be motivated to simplify the whole arrangement by selling him what he wants. The kitchen was very quiet. Cole said, "You read legal documents. I read everything Ellie said. It was a survival skill." Cole looked at the paper. "We need Marcus Webb," he said. Then he looked at Reed. "The original deed." Reed had been waiting for this. He was already nodding. The original deed, Cole confirmed, the one from the Territorial Land Office with the full boundary survey. Voss is working from a copy that is missing the final page. I know this because my father told me that was how the claim would be protected if anyone ever tried to challenge it. The last page shows the watercourse in full. Reed nodded again. "I can go." Cole looked at Ellie again with a directness that had been building in his gaze for days. Something that went past assessment and into something else. Something she did not have a complete name for yet. "None of this," he said, "is a consequence of your presence here. That is Voss's work, not yours. I want you to understand the difference." Ellie held his gaze. "I understand it," she said. "I also want you to know that if my being here is what he is using, I am willing to address that directly in whatever way is most useful to you." Cole shook his head once the small conclusive motion that meant this line of reasoning was finished. "You address it by staying," he said. He stood, picked up his hat, and went out. Marcus Webb came to Triple C the following morning with the information he had gathered, and the information changed the shape of everything. He was a compact, precise man in his 50s who had been practicing law in Montana Territory since before it was fully surveyed, and had the patience of someone who has watched many things develop over a long horizon. He sat at the kitchen table and laid out what his contacts in Ridge Creek had established. Dorothea Mason had signed a document provided by Harlan Voss. The document was a supporting affidavit claiming that she had witnessed a conversation in 1869 in which the original water rights boundary had been verbally amended. The document bore the correct form and the relevant dates, but the copy of the deed Voss had attached to support it was missing its final survey page, which was the page that showed clearly, and in the original surveyor's hand, that the watercourse was fully within the Callaway boundary as originally drawn. "She signed it," Reed said. "He had been standing against the wall, and now he was not moving at all. The document is available for review," Marcus Webb said carefully. "The signature is consistent with her handwriting." Cole was sitting at the head of the table, and he looked at nothing in particular for a moment that was long enough to mean something. Ellie watched his face and understood what she was seeing. This was not grief for the woman. That was not the nature of it. This was something colder and in some ways harder, the particular reckoning of a man who discovers that a thing he had already put behind him was not behind him in quite the way he had organized himself to believe. The confirmation arrived and settled into him the way cold settles into stone, changing nothing on the outside and changing everything about what the thing is now carrying. He looked up at Marcus Webb. "Reed goes to Cheyenne for the original deed," Cole said. "That is what matters. The rest of this is her business and the law's business, and I have no interest in either." He stood and went out to the barn, which was where he always went when he needed the particular kind of silence that could not be found indoors. Reed met Ellie's eyes across the table. She gave him nothing back because there was nothing useful to give. Some situations required the patience to let them be what they were without trying to turn them into something easier. In the days that followed the departure of Marcus Webb, the ranch continued in its rhythms. Cole and Cade managed the cattle and the fences. Ellie kept the house and Lily and the meals. Chester developed a habit of sitting in the kitchen window, which nobody discussed, but nobody discouraged. The matter of Cheyenne sat at the back of every day, like a task not yet assigned present, but not yet urgent, waiting for the right moment. On the second afternoon, Cole found Ellie at the southwest fence, looking at the mountains which had been changing color all week as the light shifted toward autumn angles and the aspens along the creek began their first faint turn toward gold. He stood beside her for a moment and then said, "Do you see the line of cloud at the top of the western ridge?" She looked. "There is always cloud there," she said. He shook his head. "That particular line sitting at that angle with that gray color in the lower half. That means weather coming in 2 or 3 days. Real weather, not just rain." She looked more carefully. The cloud was distinct from the normal cap that rested on the ridge lower and more structured, with a thickening toward the south that she would not have recognized without being shown. "What kind of weather?" she said. "The kind that comes fast," Cole said. "When it arrives, you will know it because the air will change character before the rain does. It will go very still first. Then the temperature will drop faster than feels right. After that, you have maybe 30 minutes before it is fully on you." She nodded, filing this in the same place she filed everything he told her that was useful. "Get the girl inside when it comes," he said. "I will," she said. He went back to the fence. That evening, Lily took Duke's lead rope for the first time herself, walking the pony in a slow oval around the yard, while Cade stood in the center of it with his hands in his pockets and his expression suggesting that he had never been prouder of a horse in his life. Cole came out of the barn and stopped in the doorway and watched without saying anything. Lily was very serious about the operation, her small face set with the concentration of someone doing an important thing and knowing it. Duke walked in the oval and accepted the arrangement with the adaptable patience that small horses in the care of determined children often learn. Cole watched for perhaps 5 minutes and then went back inside. But he had watched for 5 minutes. The storm came on the third night. It came exactly as Cole had described, with the particular sequence he had laid out against the mountain sky 2 days before. The evening had been warm and still, the kind of stillness that felt like something holding its breath. Then the temperature dropped sharply. Then the first rumble moved through the mountains from the west like something large and unhurried deciding to get up. By 3 in the morning, the rain was not falling so much as arriving the full weight of a Montana autumn storm, delivering itself to the valley with the efficiency of something that has been building for a long time and has finally found its place to land. Thunder broke in sequences that shook the window glass. Lightning turned the yard to flat white in intervals that made the dark between them darker. Ellie came awake at the first major thunderclap, which was her nature. She turned in the dark to the bed where Lily slept. It was empty. She lit the candle. The room was exactly as it always was, the chest with Lily's clothes, the window seat where Chester occasionally slept, the mountain view now showing nothing but the white pulse of lightning at intervals. The blanket had been pulled back from the middle the way you pull it when you get up in the night. Ellie was out the door and in the hall before the thought had fully completed itself. She called Lily's name. Reed appeared from his room with his boots already half on. Cade came from the far end of the hall. Cole came from his room near the stairs, already fully dressed, which told her something about how lightly he slept and how quickly he was capable of moving when he needed to. She goes outside when she hears water. Ellie said, her voice carrying the forced calm of someone making herself useful in a situation that requires it. The creek. She has asked about the creek every day since she first saw it. Cole had his coat in his hand and was already at the stairs. "Stay inside," he said. Not a suggestion, not a command either quite. The voice of a man who has assessed the situation and knows precisely what each person needs to be doing. He went out. The storm hit the back door when he opened it, wind and rain filling the kitchen. For the moment it took him to get through it, and then the door swung back and Ellie stood in the kitchen with Cade beside her and Reed at the window, trying to see anything through the water running down the glass. She counted. She was not aware of deciding to count. She simply found that she was doing it, measuring the time in the only units available, each one taking longer than the one before it, in the way they do when the content of them matters. 7 minutes, then 12, then the back door opened. Cole came through it with Lily in his arms, the child wrapped against his chest with both her arms around his neck. soaking wet, shivering, her eyes wide open and alert in the particular way that children are alert when they have been frightened and are now safe and understand the difference. Cole was wet through his hair, flat against his forehead, his boots leaving pools on the kitchen floor. He set Lily down carefully onto her feet and then crouched to her level and looked at her, checking her without words, his hands moving briefly to her face and her arms in the practiced assessment of someone who needs to know a thing is true before he can move past the moment of not knowing it. She is all right, he said. His voice was level. His voice was always level. Ellie crossed the kitchen floor and took Lily into her arms and felt the small, shivering body in the cold and the absolute solidity of her being entirely present and uninjured. And she held on for a moment that was longer than was strictly necessary for the conveying of information. She had been at the creek, Cole said. She heard the water rising. The bank was flooding. How close, Cade said from behind Ellie's shoulder. Cole did not answer this. He stood up straight and went to the stove to see if there was anything hot. Ellie leaned back and looked at Lily's face. The girl looked back at her with the complicated expression of someone who knows they have caused a problem and is not entirely clear yet on the magnitude of it. I wanted to see it in the storm, Lily said. The water goes loud. Ellie held her face in both hands and pressed their foreheads gently together and did not say anything for a moment. I know, she said finally, but you cannot go to the water in the dark without telling anyone, not ever. Do you understand that completely? Lily said, yes, Ellie, I understand it completely. Cole turned from the stove with a cup of hot water from the kettle. He brought it to Lily and crouched down and wrapped both her small hands around it. He said, drink this. Lily drank it. She looked at Cole over the rim of the cup with the calm, direct gaze she had been deploying at him since the first morning. Thank you, she said. Cole looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man who has just moved through something at considerable speed and is now processing the aftermath at a different pace entirely. You are welcome, he said. He stood and went to the window. Reed heated more water. Cade got a dry blanket from the chest at the foot of the stairs. The kitchen reorganized itself around the work of making sure Lily was warm, and the immediate emergency was passed and through all of it. Cole stood at the window with one hand on the frame and looked at the storm moving through the yard, and Ellie watched him from where she sat with Lily in her lap. And there was something in the set of him that was different from any way she had seen him hold himself before. The walls were still there, but something had moved in the foundation of them. After Lily was back in her bed, dry and warm and asleep within 3 minutes of her head reaching the pillow, Ellie went to the back porch. The storm was passing. The rain had dropped from its earlier force to something softer and more reasonable, and the thunder was moving east now, growing quieter in increments. The air was cold and clean, in the way air only gets after a major storm has run through it and taken everything that was hanging in it before. Cole was there already. He was standing at the porch rail looking out at the yard, and when she came out, he did not turn. She stood beside him and looked out at the same thing he was looking at, which was the yard in the dark, with the last of the rain still coming down and the mountains invisible behind the clouds. She said, I want to tell you something. He waited. When I came here, she said, I came because I needed a home for Lily, and I had no other option that was real. I want you to know that is still true. I have not changed the facts of my situation. She paused. But somewhere in these weeks, the facts stopped being the only thing she said. And I did not plan for that, and I am not entirely sure what to do with it, but I think you are owed the truth of it. I have been watching you in the same careful way that you have been watching me, and what I have seen is a man I did not expect. I expected someone manageable, someone I could learn to live beside without asking anything unreasonable of myself. What I've found is something else. You have made me ask more of myself than I have in 2 years. Cole turned and looked at her. There was nothing between them now in terms of the careful distance they had maintained, nothing of the assessment in the calibration. He was just looking at her the way you look at something you have been trying to determine the nature of and have finally in a particular moment understood. He said, I have been attempting to convince myself that I had no standing to feel the things I was feeling. that you would be better served by a situation with fewer complications than I come with. I have been making that argument to myself for weeks. And she said, and he said I was at the creek tonight and I found her in the dark 3 feet from a flooding bank and I carried her back through the storm. And every part of that experience was entirely clear about what it was telling me. He did not say what the experience had been telling him. He did not need to. The fact that he had named it was itself the thing. They stood at the rail in the rain that was almost past and did not say anything more for a long time. But the standing together in that silence was a different kind of standing than anything in the weeks before it. Something had been moved from one side of a ledger to another, and both of them knew the balance had changed. The morning after the storm, Agnes Fuller came to Triple C. She came with a covered-ish in the bearing of a woman performing a charitable duty, and she sat in Ellie's kitchen and said things that she meant kindly, and that landed with the precision of a well-placed blade. She spoke about Harlan Voss and his legal maneuvers. She spoke about the talk in town. She spoke about Cole Calloway being a good man who did not deserve complication. And she spoke about Ellie's history in Boston with the careful neutrality of someone who has looked into something and found it less reassuring than hoped. The word she used was liability. She said it gently. She said it as though she were doing Ellie a service by saying it. She said it and then covered it with more warmth and more concern and more expressions of sincere goodwill. Ellie thanked her. She walked her to the door. She closed the door and went upstairs. She did not weep. She was not that kind of woman, not anymore. But she sat on the edge of the bed in the room that had been given to her and had gradually become her room. And she looked at the mountains through the window, and she thought about the word liability and about the debt her father had left and about the legal document with her name underlined and about the 1,500 miles she had come on the strength of something she had let herself believe in. Perhaps the honest thing is to remove the complication. Perhaps the honest thing is to go. She got her bag from the corner and set it on the bed and began to fold things into it. She was not crying, she was thinking. She was making the kind of decision she had always made by considering the practical shape of things and acting on what she found. She was being reasonable. She told herself this with some conviction. The door opened and Lily came in. She looked at the bag on the bed. She looked at Ellie's hands. She looked at Ellie's face with the complete attention of a child who understands everything that is not being said. She crossed the room and sat down on the bed beside the bag and placed her small hand over Ellie's. She said, "This is our home, Ellie." 3 words. Ellie looked at her sister and did not say anything for a long time. She sat down next to the bag. She did not fold anything else. She sat with Lily's hand over hers and looked out of the window at the mountains that did not move. And she thought about all the things she had survived by being reasonable. And she thought about the porch the night before and the words that had been said and the words that had not needed to be said. And she sat very still and let herself feel without any attempt to redirect it into something practical, the full weight of what was at stake. She did not finish packing the bag. That evening, Reed found Cole in the barn. He had been expecting to find him there. He knew his brother's habits the way you know the habits of someone you have lived beside for your entire life, every one of them, every retreat and every silence, and every particular way of being somewhere specific when something had gotten difficult. He sat down on the hay bale and said, "Ellie nearly left today." Cole did not move. "Agnes Fuller came," Reed said. "She told her she was a liability. She was packing her bag when Lily came in." Cole set down the piece of harness he had been working on. Reed continued, "I am going to say something to you and I want you to hear it without deciding to be defensive about it until I have finished." Cole looked at him. "She came here with everything she had," Reed said. "She told you the truth about every single thing when she could have made it easier for herself by doing otherwise. She has worked every day. She has asked for nothing. She has watched you circle her for weeks like a man trying to decide whether it is safe to want something, and she has been patient about it because she is a patient person. And while you have been deciding whether it is safe, she is over there packing her bag because a woman who does not know her said the word liability in her kitchen." A silence. I am not asking you to be ready, Reed said. I am asking you not to make the decision for her without asking her. Cole said, what does that mean? It means Reed said that you have been telling yourself she would be better off without you. You have been making that argument like it is a kindness, but it is not a kindness. It is fear wearing better clothes, and she deserves to make her own determination about what she is better off with, not you making it for her. Cole picked up the harness again and then set it down again. Reed waited. There is the matter of Dora, Cole said finally. The matter of what I apparently missed the first time. The matter of what that indicates about my capacity to read a person. Reed looked at his brother steadily. You did not miss it the first time, he said. Dora changed. People do. You judged her correctly when you knew her, and she changed after. That is not a failure of judgment. That is just how life works when you let people in. A long silence. The horses moved in their stalls. Cole said, I know who Ellie Hartwell is. Reed said, I know you do. Cole was quiet for a moment more. Then he said, you go to Cheyenne tomorrow. I go to Cheyenne tomorrow, Reed said. He stood and went out. Reed left before the sun was up. He came back on the fourth day in the early afternoon with the expression of a man carrying something he is looking forward to setting down. He opened the leather wallet and placed the deed on the table. The original certified and sealed by the Territorial Land Office with the final survey page intact. The watercourse of Clearwater Creek was drawn in the original surveyor's hand across the northwest corner of the Triple C boundary, running clearly and unambiguously within the property. Voss had been working from a copy missing that page. Marcus Webb took the deed and the affidavit that Dora Mason had signed and placed them before the Territorial Land Court. The proceedings were not lengthy. The deed was what it was. The affidavit measured against the original survey described a boundary that did not exist in the primary record. The legal challenge was dismissed. Harlan Voss left Ridges Creek 10 days later without ceremony, closing his office and moving his operations to the next county without explanation. Nobody at Triple C was informed directly. They heard it the way news travels in small communities from several directions at once, confirmed when the silence from one specific quarter became permanent. Dorothea Mason left 3 days before him. She sent no note and did not come to the ranch. Cole received this information from Reverend Silas Bird, who mentioned it in passing during a chance meeting in town, and Cole said thank you and continued with his errand and did not speak of it again. That evening, 4 people sat around the Triple C kitchen table with Lily to edit as a matter of course. And the food was good, and the conversation moved the way conversation moves when people have passed through a difficult thing together and come out the other side of it into a place that fills against all reasonable prior expectation, like solid ground. Cade said something about General the Barn Cat that made Lily correct him on a point of factual accuracy with considerable authority. Reed extended the argument further than was required. Cole ate his meal and said nothing, which was the same as always, except that the quality of his silence had changed in the way that things change when the weight they have been carrying has been set down. He caught Ellie's eye across the table. She held it. Neither of them smiled. That was not yet the precise shape of the thing between them, but they held each other's gaze for the length of a breath, which was enough. The next morning was one of those autumn mornings in Montana that arrived like an apology for everything the season intends to do, later clear and warm, and entirely without wind, the light coming off the mountains at an angle that made everything look like something worth keeping. Ellie was in the yard with Lily gathering the last wildflowers from the south fence line before the cold took them. It was a practical task. She intended to dry them, but the morning was good and the work was slow, and Lily was ahead of her in the grass, moving between the stems with her small basket and the focused attention she brought to every physical task. Cole was working the fence at the far end of the yard. He had been at it since early morning and had not said much in the days since Reed came back. But the silence was different. It was the silence of a man who has decided something and is waiting for the correct moment to put it down. Lily arrived at the section of fence where Cole was working. She stopped and watched him for a moment, which was her standard practice before initiating conversation with anyone she took seriously. Then she said, "Do you like my sister?" Cole set his mallet down. He looked at Lily. He looked up at Ellie, who was 10 feet away in the wildflowers and had gone completely still and was very carefully not looking at either of them. He looked back at Lily. "Yes," he said. "I do." Lily nodded with the satisfaction of someone who has confirmed a thing they already knew. She said, "She likes you too. She does not say it, but I can tell because she watches you the same way she watches things she is thinking hard about." Cole looked across the yard at Ellie, who was looking at the ground with an expression that was for the first time in his experience of her something close to undone. Lily gathered her basket and returned to the flowers. Cole stood at the fence and looked at Ellie for a long moment. She looked up and met his eyes. The distance across the yard between them was perhaps 20 feet and felt like considerably less than that. He picked his mallet back up and finished the fence post he was working on. But he was smiling. Not large, not performed. The kind of smile that comes from somewhere that has not been accessed in a long time and is quietly glad to find itself in use again. The next morning, Cole was awake before the sun. He dressed in the dark and went downstairs and took the small box from the drawer of the kitchen dresser where it had lived since his father placed it there, the year his mother died, saying, "Keep this until you are certain and then be certain." He went out to the backyard. The sky was the color of the inside of a shell, that early gray that has pink in it before the pink has decided to become something more committed. The mountains were dark shapes holding the last of the night. The grass was wet with dew and the air was cold in the clean way of autumn mornings when everything has been rinsed by weeks of rain and is starting over. He stood in the yard and opened the box. The ring was simple, silver thin, worn to a smoothness by 20 years of his mother's hand. There was no stone, there was no engraving. It was a working woman's ring made to be worn every day by someone who used her hands, and it had been worn every day until the day she no longer could. He held it in his palm and looked at it for a moment. The back door opened. Ellie came out with her tea the way she did every morning, and she stopped when she saw him standing in the yard. She stood at the top of the porch steps and looked at him and at the box in his hand, and she was very still. He turned and looked up at her. He did not kneel. That was not who he was, not the shape of how he did things. He stood straight in the yard with the ring in the center of his open palm, and he said what he had to say in the voice he used for everything flat and even and entirely without performance, which was the only way he knew how to mean something completely. "Eleanor Hartwell," he said, "I am asking you to stay. Not because the arrangement requires it and not because of what you can provide. I am asking because this place is better with you in it, because I am better with you in it, because Lily is right, because I have been certain about very few things in my life, and I am certain about this." He paused. "Will you stay?" he said. Ellie came down the porch steps. She stood in front of him and looked at the ring and then looked up at his face, at the amber eyes that were holding no distance at all. Now none of the careful management of the past weeks, just the thing itself offered plainly. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will stay." He put the ring on her finger. His hands were steady. His hands were always steady. From the upstairs window, visible for a moment before she disappeared, a small face with wild blonde hair in the early light. Lily had been watching from at least the moment Cole came downstairs, possibly longer. From deeper in the house came the sound of rapid, small feet on the stairs. The wedding was on a Saturday at the end of September when the aspens along Clearwater Creek had gone to full gold, and the mountains had their first light dusting of snow on the highest ridges, and the air had that quality of the last warm days before the cold takes hold for real. Reverend Silas Bird came out from Ridge Creek in his good coat, with his book under his arm, and the unhurried pace of a man who has conducted enough of these ceremonies to know that the important part is not the speed at which you get through it. Lily scattered wildflowers from the south fence line down the length of the porch with the methodical thoroughness of someone who has been entrusted with an important logistical responsibility. She had spent the previous afternoon collecting and organizing them by color in her room, which nobody asked her to do. Reed stood beside Cole. Cade stood beside Ellie because she had no family to do it. Agnes Fuller came with a pee and an expression that was as close to an apology as her nature allowed. A handful of neighbors came because Reverend Byrd had mentioned it, and the Callaways had been good neighbors for a decade. It was small. It was real. Cole wore his clean shirt and the dark trousers he kept for occasions, and he stood on the porch boards in the September afternoon light, looking like a man who has decided something and is at peace with having decided it. When Reverend Byrd asked the question, Cole looked at Ellie and said, "I do," in the voice of someone who has said very few things in their life that were not true and was not starting now. Lily, standing between them with her empty basket, said in a perfectly clear voice and with complete satisfaction, "Now we are a family." Nobody disagreed with her. The years moved the way years do when the life inside them is full. The first winter was the hardest thing Ellie had ever done and the most interesting. Montana Territory in January was a different world from what she had seen in August. The same land translated into a language she did not yet speak. Everything reduced to the specific and essential work of keeping warm and fed and functional in a cold that had strong opinions about the matter. Cole taught her what he knew. She learned faster than he expected, which she did not find surprising because she had always learned fast when the subject had stakes. Lily discovered that snow was one of the great achievements of the natural world and spent the better part of 3 months operating in it whenever Cole or Kate or Reed would permit, which they generally did, because it was difficult to argue with the completeness of her enthusiasm. In the spring, the first garden went in along the south wall of the house where the light was best, because Ellie had been thinking about where the light would fall since October. Heirloom tomatoes and kitchen herbs and a row of the same wildflowers she had gathered for the wedding. Cole put a window box under the kitchen window without saying why. It was understood. In the autumn of the first year, Cole built a shelf into the bedroom wall at the exact height of the windowsill where she had taken to setting things. He measured it twice and cut the wood himself and said nothing about it when he was done. Ellie ran her hand along it that evening and said nothing either. Some conversations did not require words. Late in that first year together, in the cold months before winter fully closed over the valley, Elias was born. Cole had decided on the name before the boy arrived, the same name as his father, because that was how such things were done in families that understood continuity. He stood at the cradle in the small room they had made ready and looked at his son for a long time without saying anything, and Ellie watched him from the doorway and understood everything in his face, the particular recognition of a man who has spent years keeping something alive and has just understood in a new and specific way why. The years continued. Lily grew up on the ranch with horses and books and a stubbornness that everyone claimed she had gotten from somewhere else. She went to the Ridge Creek School and came back full of considered opinions about mathematics and history and the correct way to do most things, and she was right about a surprising proportion of them. She had her mother's hair and her sister's bearing and a specific way of looking directly at problems that was entirely her own. In the 15th year, 1888, she married a rancher's son from the North Valley, a quiet and capable man named Robert Garner, and Cole walked her down the aisle that Reverend Byrd had arranged between the aspens in the yard because she had no father to do it. She had never needed anyone to fill that particular space except the man who was walking beside her, and they both knew it without having to say so. Cole held her hand until the moment came to give it, and then he held it for just a moment longer before he let go in the way you hold something that you have tended for a long time and are now releasing into its proper life. Triple C grew steadily. Reed expanded the North Herd in the 5th year and built the second barn. Cade put up a house of his own on the East Quarter in the 8th year and ran his portion of the operation from there. And on Sunday evenings, the whole family moved between the two houses without formality, the way families do when the distance between them is small and the invitation is permanent. They had hard years, a drought in the 9th year that took 20% of the summer herd, a fire in the 12th year that destroyed the original barn, the one Cole's father had built, and required 3 weeks of labor with every neighbor in the valley to rebuild. A winter in the 17th year that came 6 weeks early and stayed 6 weeks late and tested everything that could be tested. They came through all of it because that is what you do when you have built something together. You come through it, and then the thing you have built is stronger for having been tested, which is not a comfortable truth, but is the only one worth relying on. In the 20th year, Elias's daughter Marianne was born. Cole sat beside the cradle for 15 minutes without saying anything, and Ellie stood at the door and saw his face and recognized it as the same face he had shown at Elias's cradle 20 years before, the face of a man who has just received a confirmation he did not know he was still waiting for. In the summer of 1898, 25 years after the afternoon, Ellie had stepped down from the Ridge Creek stagecoach with a bundle in her arms and an angle to her chin that said, "I am here and I am not afraid." Montana Territory had been the state of Montana for 9 years, and Triple C Ranch had become something that the original deed had not been large enough to describe. It was a hot August afternoon, the same angle of summer light that had been there at the beginning, the same smell of grass and pine, and the particular quality of western air that Ellie had never entirely found a way to describe to anyone who had not stood in it. She was sitting on the back porch. Marianne, who was 5 years old and the oldest of Elias's children, was in the yard pursuing a butterfly with the absolute conviction of someone who has not yet learned that butterflies are not catchable. She had Ellie's hair and her great-grandmother's build, small and determined, and she ran through the grass with both arms out and changed direction with startling speed every time the butterfly did. The other grandchildren were elsewhere on the property, which was large enough now that elsewhere meant genuinely elsewhere. Elias and his wife were in the west pasture. Lily and Robert would come for supper. Cade's family was in the east quarter house. Reed was somewhere among the cattle, which was where Reed had always been happiest. It was a full afternoon. Cole came out and sat down beside her. He was 57 years old. His hair had gone entirely silver, which suited him in the way that things suit people who have earned them. He moved more slowly in the mornings than he once had, and his lower back made its opinions known in cold weather, and the lines on his face had deepened past character into something that was simply the record of years honestly lived. His eyes were exactly the same. The amber had not changed at all. They sat without speaking for a while, which was still their habit and always would be. Ellie watched Marianne in the grass chasing her butterfly, with both arms wide and entirely serious about the enterprise. She said quietly, "The girl who stepped off that stagecoach in August of 1873, if someone had told her what was waiting for her here, she would not have believed it." Cole looked out at the yard. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I would have believed it." She turned and looked at him. He said, "I read your letter that first night in the barn. I read the part where you said I keep my word, and I thought that person is telling the truth." He paused. "I folded it and put it in my pocket, and I was right." Ellie looked at him for a long time, at the face that had become as familiar to her as any landscape more familiar than Boston had ever been more familiar than any place she had lived before she came to this valley. "You never told me that," she said. Cole said, "I thought you knew." In the yard, Marianne stopped running and stood very still with her arms at her sides, watching the butterfly land on a fence post 3 feet from. She held the stillness for a full 10 seconds with the patience of someone who has been taught that some things require it. The butterfly opened and closed its wings once. Then it flew away. Marianne watched it go, arms dropping to her sides, and then she turned and ran toward the porch with the energy of a child who has already decided that the next thing is going to be better than the last. "Grandma," she said when she arrived. "I almost caught it." "You were very close," Ellie told her. "Next time I will be more close," Marianne said with the tone of someone filing a plan. She climbed up onto the step and settled herself against Ellie's knee and looked out at the yard with the satisfied attention of a 5-year-old surveying everything she considers hers. Cole put his hand over Ellie's on the porch rail. The silver ring caught the afternoon light for a moment, worn smooth by 25 years of the same hand thinner now than on the morning he had placed it there in the cold dawn yard with the mountains dark behind him and the whole rest of their life still ahead. She turned her hand over and held his. The mountains stood at the edge of the valley the way they always had, carrying the afternoon light. The way they had carried it before there was anyone here to see it, the way they would carry it when all of this was grass and memory. But right now, at this particular angle of a particular afternoon in August of 1898, they were the background of a life that had been built on nothing more complicated than the decision to tell the truth and stay. Triple C Ranch, home.